YouTube, I'm here. Camera is acting normal today, but don't get too excited, because maybe by tonight, tomorrow, or 2 days, when it's time for me to make my NFL predictions for videos of the matchups that take place on Saturday and Sunday of this week coming up, the camera might go funny. Why it's not, we gotta take an advantage. Today's YouTube video is going to be called Sex Game, The Rise and Fall of Hip Hop and Rap, Part 1. I'm going to say it again. The name of this video is called Sex Game, The Rise and Fall of Hip Hop and Rap. Now, I have never told you why this video was going to get made. I wanted to make this video 2 or 3 years ago, and I had like at least 8 people tell me you can't make no series all through this until you become established as a YouTuber. Now, as you do know, there are some people who watch my videos. Some of them love what I do on YouTube, and some of them hate and despise what I do. And a lot of my haters don't like that YouTube video that I made last week called Alpha Wolf versus Beta Snake. You know, that video got them into their feelings. Well, you know, you want to know what's the funny thing about that? That Lil Wayne could take that same title of that video, and there would be no selective outrage if Lil Wayne made the title of that video, because why? It's Lil Wayne. If it ain't Lil Wayne, let's say it's Drake. Drake could take that same title and basically talk about the same exact stuff, and nobody will take it personal because it's Drake. And somewhere in this new series that I'm making, I am going to explain the ignorance and the stupidity of people who think stupid like that. Why? Because it needs to be addressed. And that's what YouTubers like O'Shea Do Jackson get angry and upset about. Nobody wants to address that. Ringo TV Raw gets mad because nobody wants to address that particular issue. And even Solo TV 84 gets angry and upset when nobody wants to particularly address that issue. You have some individuals that actually think like that, which is actually sad and disappointing that they think like that. I mean, seriously, if anyone should be angry or upset because I made that type of video, it should be people who don't get content for themselves. Like guys that are in their late 50s, early 60s, mid 70s, them the ones should be angry and enraged with me for not making videos about what they went through at my age. My content is for people that's in their 20s, in their 30s, and possibly early 40s. Not too many people in their late 40s, mid 50s, early 60s watch my videos. And when they do watch their videos, they're upset because, one, they don't like the way I'm talking. I can talk like this because I used to hang out with people of that age, so that's why I can talk like that. And number 2, my dad is the one who gives me the information on what to say and what not to say on the internet. Sometimes he wish I don't say it the way that I'm saying it, but some of this information comes from him in an intelligent way. So stop player hating. Now, let's get on with the video presentation. The 1970s brought us to a period where music was music. If it weren't for people like Kurtis Blows, you know, his hit single, There Goes the Brakes, break it down. I wasn't even born yet when Kurtis Blows came out. But he was like the Jay-Z of hip-hop in the 1970s. And it wasn't just Kurtis Blows. You know, you had other guys pop up on the scene in the 1970s. You know, Brooklyn, you know, Bronx, New York is where hip-hop originated, is where a lot of people say, which is up for debate. We don't know if it started in Los Angeles or if it started in New York. Most people are going to tell you it took place in New York. But you had Kurtis Blows. You've had a rapper called D-Light, which was the first time a rapper took a name and called himself that name. Like in the beginning, you would just use your first and last name and you would name the band. If we go back to the early days of the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s and the 60s, it was jazz. It was blues, rhythm and blues. And that was the type of music you had for like almost 60, 70 years. That was the type of music that we African Americans listened to. But we had the transitional period where a lot of the black people wanted to create their own style of music. And at the time, the music industry wasn't going to allow an artist to express themselves creatively. They didn't know what they were going for. Hip-hop was like this new concept that you could express yourself in a good way or in a bad way. It was new, and nobody knew what to make of it. So when Kurtis Blows started doing hip-hop, he had already done like 2 albums or 3 albums at that point. And he started writing his rhymes. He started going on the tracks. He started hitting us with some hard rhymes. And this is when the world got introduced to what rhymes are. Like, people was like, what is rhymes? And he was doing it. And every time he went to a show, he would sell out the show. You know, Rapper Delight would come out. Kumo D would come out. And Run DMC hadn't even came into like the late 1970s. But you can see they were also being influenced by people like Kurtis Blows. At that time, Ron Simmons, before he had Jeff Jam Records, was kind of like, he was in that time period where he saw the potential that hip-hop has in New York City and how it would be felt all over the world and the United States. You had all these artists pop up. You know, Rapper Delight started being the first ones to start talking about the streets, which the studios at the time was strongly against. He would start talking about how the streets, he would talk about how people can't get no jobs, people being discriminated, and sometimes they had to tell Rapper Delight, you can't be going on the mic and telling them type of stories. And he would just ignore them and do it anyway, which got him into a lot of trouble. You know, and then you had Kool D came in, Kool and the Gang pop up, and then you had Rakim. Rakim was kind of like that street version, like before there was Ice Cube, before there was T.I., before there was DMX, you had Rakim come on the mic, and Rakim would take controversial stuff from the news and started talking about it, and they would have to cut the mic and tell him, you can't be doing this, the radio ain't gonna like this. And he would just do it anyway. So you could kind of see how hip-hop was already shaping up to be. You were in that era where they would put your stuff on record, they would play your songs on the radio, but they were kind of like strongly, they would say, well, that's in the East, here in the West, you gotta change up your music. And that was the start of it. Now, these guys paved the way for people of today. If it wasn't for Rakim and what he did, you probably would not get a DMX if it wasn't for Rakim. There would be no DMX. There would be no T.I. There would be no Ice Cube, no Ice-T. They wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Rakim. Rapper Delight. There would be no Scarface. There would be no Killer Mike. There would be none of these rappers that you see today. If it wasn't for Kurtis Blows, who started to fall into the same category, you would have no Kanye West. You would not have no Jay-Z, no Nas, no Tupac, no Notorious B.I.G. These are the old school legends of the 1970s. If it weren't for the DJs of the 1970s, the DJs of the 1980s and the 90s and the 2000s, they would have not been able to have that creative vision where they could skit and cut on the DJ. Like people like DJ Homicide, you know, DJ Drama. Those were guys that were inspired by the DJs of the 1970s. And these artists popped up because they were the guys that you saw on your TV set rapping. You know, you had the afros coming up. The afros was the hairstyle. I remember when I was a little kid, they used to tell me stories how they didn't want you to be on stage with an afro because it was intimidating to the networks. They wouldn't play your music, they wouldn't play your records in those 1970s because they felt that was intimidating. Motown. Right in that same 1970s, who's another artist that just popped out of nowhere? Rick James, right? Rick James popped up out of nowhere. Yeah, Rick James come out. And he was so controversial that Rick James also would get in trouble. First, his first 2 albums, he started talking about love and getting married and having kids. And then somewhere around 1973, 1974, you had Rick James started saying the B word. And people was like, oh my God, he can't say that on album. What's wrong with Rick James? You had James Brown. They call him the godfather of rock and roll. You had the Isley Brothers. All in the 1970s, these were the legends that were kicking ass, taking names, and just dominating the game in the 1970s. And people like Art Kelly was like a little kid, and you could see where Art Kelly got some of his influences from. Same thing with Dr. Dre. And you had producers. Motown introduced us to one of the biggest artists of all times, the legendary, late, great Michael Jackson, when they had the Jackson 5. They kind of came in the middle of the 1970s. The year was like 1973, 1974, 75, around up in there, and just dominated the game. No one had never seen a group of kids singing pop like that. And, Prince kind of popped up on the scene. Purple Rain, he popped up right up in there and they just started dominating the 1970s. And it was that era where we had the exportation era, where we would do movies and television, where they were now allowing blacks to be in the movies, television shows. You had movies like Superfly. Yeah, Superfly. The original Superfly, not the one that came out like last year. And little kids like Tupac Shakur was actually popping up at these shows trying to learn these rhymes and trying to write these rhymes even when he was a little kid. And you could see what was going to happen. And right in the middle of hip-hop, you could see who was going to emerge. Somewhere in those late 70s, getting to the 80s, Run DMC came in and started rocking the mic with hip-hop. And they were being considered as the leaders. Public Enemies popped out of nowhere. Fight the Power, that was a big hit. Now, this is stuff that I wasn't even born yet for. And then you could see LL Cool J would get brought in by Run DMC. And if it wasn't for Run DMC, you would have probably never got an NWA. You probably would have never got an Ice Cube West Side Connection. You probably would have never got Cypress Hill. This is when they started creating these super rap groups in the late 70s, and it would kind of spill into those 80s, and then you could see that all of a sudden we had boy bands pop up. That's what allowed studios in the late 80s, early 90s to create groups like New Kids on the Block. So if you think about the groups, Run DMC, Kool and the Gang, if it weren't for them, you would have never got an NWA. You would have never got Cash Money Records. You would have never got a No Limit Records in rap groups. They were rap groups. Where do you think Boys the Men came from? There was Boys the Men. What do you think all these groups started popping up in the late 80s, early 90s came from? It all started with the 1970s. When I was a kid and a teenager in junior high and high school, they would always talk about how the 1970s is what started hip-hop. That's what started rap music. That's what kicked it off. And I would always ask a lot of the old school guys which era was better. And they always say, oh, youngster, if you was in the 1970s, you would have saw what real hip-hop is, real rap music, not the stuff you listening to today. Some of, young people like me, we get insulted when we get told by past generations, you don't know what real hip-hop is. You don't know what real rap music is. That's where the arguments and the barber shop and the gym takes place, on the basketball court, fight break out, because a past generation tells you, you don't know what real hip-hop is. You don't know what real rap music is. Like when Nelly got into it with KRS-One about 16 years ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago because Nelly said something in the song, and KRS came in those late 70s, early 80s, and they had the two-man crew. Think about it. The stuff that Kid RS-One was talking about, people like Busta Rhymes would start speaking on. Jay-Z popped up and started speaking on it. So you look in that time period, it was considered a new phenomenon. Everyone was getting in on the act. It wasn't until late 80s, early 90s that people would get on it. Now, as the 1970s started to draw to a close, and guys like Kurtis Blows were no longer able to sing on the mic, now that he was, a producer, and all those guys were getting older, and they saw the new generation pop up. Run DMC started to take command. Public Enemy took command. AWA took command. LL Cool J came in there and became a solo artist, which that was probably like the first time ever in history that they took a rapper out of the group and let him just dominate by himself. Like LL just came in and just killed it. And then we had our first beef in those late 70s, early 80s. It was Ice Cube, popping up on the scene. That's when he started being the gangster rapper. And then we had LL Cool J have his first beef with Ice-T. But LL Cool J already had a beef in those late 70s, early 80s with another rap artist before he had one with Ice-T. And you could see that the 70s were now coming to a close, that disco era, that hip-hop era was now closing, and a new chapter was beginning. As I come back with part 2, we talk about the history of the 1980s and how the 1980s changed and how the world saw hip-hop as something negative, as something that is just destroying people's minds, and how they would not consider it a part of the music industry, and how they always thought hip-hop and rap was just not good, and how they was demonizing it, and how the media would do what they did. So when I come back in part 2, I'll talk about how the 1980s was a reflection of me growing up and what type of artists I would nod my head to and who I was inspired by in part 2.